I just left the federal courtroom where Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella finished giving his testimony in this landmark trial between Elon Musk, OpenAI, and Microsoft. Microsoft has since become an important partner and investor to OpenAI. To date, Microsoft has committed up to $13 billion in OpenAI, and Elon has essentially said that not only has Microsoft aided and abetted their alleged deceptions, but it also has a lot of control over OpenAI. So Satya Nadella, he testified today and was asked about the blip, which is a famous event that happened at the end of 2023 when Sam was temporarily ousted from OpenAI as CEO. He testified initially that he never really got an explicit, clear answer from the board members as to why they had ousted Sam, which is why he felt comfortable with offering Sam as well as Greg Brockman jobs at Microsoft. However, during the cross-examination, a lawyer for Musk pointed to a press release that the board members had published, basically stating that Sam had been dishonest to them about a number of things, which had made their jobs difficult as board members of OpenAI. The lawyer for Elon Musk, Stephen Molo, pointed to the press release and essentially asked Satya, it seems pretty clear from this statement why they had pushed him out, don't you think? And Satya agreed. And this week should get even more interesting given Sam Altman is expected to testify, and the stakes are really high for Sam. One of the remedies that Elon is asking the courts to grant is to basically remove Sam Altman, as well as up to $180 billion in damages to be paid from OpenAI's for-profit arm to its nonprofit parent. If either of these remedies is granted, then that could seriously upend the company as well as the entire AI industry with it, because OpenAI is such a big player in the space. So a lot more to come.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
So lots going on there with the OpenAI lawsuit. And something that's super interesting, too, about it is that the challenges that they're facing, and I think this just opens up the whole fact of the matter that there's an open AI or a general AI war happening right now. It's almost an arms race. And this lawsuit's really interesting. It kicked off last week. That video was from last week, and when the trial first started. And the interesting part of it too is that OpenAI has a pretty unique business model. I mean, they're really entrenched with Microsoft. Microsoft is a big investor in OpenAI, but OpenAI also has really interesting governance that they set up, I think intentionally ambiguous, I guess you could say, because they wanted to walk the fine line or toe the line between for-profit and using AI as a profit generator, but also being socially responsible. And so they've got the for-profit AI company, OpenAI, and then there's a parent company that's not for profit. And the reason the parent company is not for profit and the way they set up that governance was so that they could keep the governance in place to keep the profit motive from taking AI in directions maybe it shouldn't go, or in ways that might harm society. So I thought that was really interesting. It's also interesting that there's legal battles just heating up. I mean, this is just one big case. It involves Elon Musk. It involves OpenAI. It involves Microsoft. So there's a lot of big players here involved, and that's what makes it interesting and intriguing and almost like a pop culture phenomena of sorts. But curious to hear if you've had any feedback on that lawsuit and where you think that takes us in the realm of AI. But it goes to show how much is at stake. I mean, I think the numbers they're throwing out was $180 billion that Elon Musk would like to see OpenAI transfer from their profits to the nonprofit parent company. So that's just a massive amount of money that you're talking about transferring. And I think it also said that Microsoft has invested $13 billion in the company over the years and has a lot of influence over OpenAI. And so it opens up a lot of things around who's going to win the OpenAI race or who's going to win the AI race in general. But I think it also opens up a lot around governance too. How should AI be governed? They're not using the word anti-competitive behavior or monopolistic, but there's collusion, I guess you could say. And I'm not an attorney, so I may be misusing some legal phrases here, but it almost feels like Elon Musk is alleging that there's collusion between Microsoft and OpenAI, and how does that affect the competition? And I think that's going to be an ongoing debate and an ongoing legal challenge that organizations are going to face. So that's how we wanted to kick off episode 273 of Transformation Ground Control. Thanks for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And before we get into today's interview, we've got a great guest for you later today. Brad Feakes, who's been on the show before, is the president of a company called Estes Group, and he's going to be on the show talking about navigating the migration to cloud ERP. But before we do that, before we get into today's interview, I want to talk about some of the things that have been trending in the industry, one of which is the Elon Musk mega trial against OpenAI and Microsoft. I also want to talk about cloud fatigue. I posted a video this week that breaks down the top 10 ERP systems for 2026. And one of the surprises in the data is something that I call cloud fatigue. After 5 years of pushing to the cloud and vendors pushing to move to the cloud, a lot of customers are looking up and saying, well, what do we actually get for this? Where's the business value? Instead of business value, a lot of organizations are looking up and seeing higher subscription cost, less flexibility, more vendor lock, quarterly force updates, whether they're ready or not. And some companies that we work with are even questioning whether or not they should have moved at all. Now, the reality is cloud isn't going away. It's the future, but the honeymoon phase is over and customers are starting to push back. And that's what I would consider a healthy thing. And today's interview with Brad Feakes from Estes Group is a perfect companion to this trend, because we're going to go deep into how to navigate cloud migration intelligently without just simply following the vendor's roadmap. And I think that's an important thing here, because a lot of times I think we get enamored by new trends and where the market is headed. And when I say we, I mean we as technologists, we as players in the technology industry. It's easy to get enamored by where the industry is headed and where some of the where some of the trends are taking us, and what some of the exciting new sexy technologies are. And it can get really easy to drink the Kool-Aid without thinking about the risks. And that's something we always try to do, is to identify a risk. Here are the risks that you need to navigate, because no matter what you do, no matter how great a technology is, there is going to be risk. And that leads me to an audience question of the week. This is actually, I would consider this a consolidation or a summary of a handful of comments and questions I've received from recent LinkedIn DMs and comments. And here's the paraphrase question here. Eric, you complain about cloud lock-in and vendor pricing every week, but what's the alternative? Stay on a 15-year-old on-prem system forever, build everything ourselves. Cloud may be imperfect, but at least the vendor handles the infrastructure, patches, and upgrades. You're being unrealistic. And again, that's a paraphrase or consolidation or a mashup of several different comments. And because, not everyone agrees with what I have to say or my thoughts, and that's okay. That's why it's good to have these healthy debates on social media. And it's a fair pushback. And I think it is fair to say, what are the options? I mean, are you saying don't move to the cloud? And that's not what I'm saying. It's a fair pushback, but I just want to be clear that I'm not anti-cloud. I'm anti-blind migration. I'm let's follow the trend because that's where the industry is headed. And let's not think about the blind spots, because those blind spots are what can really disrupt a project like this. And so I'm not anti-cloud. I'm anti-blind migration. And that's a big difference between the two. Just to be clear, the cloud has real substantial benefits. You get vendor managed infrastructure, as the audience pointed out in their comments. You get continuous updates. You get better security in most cases. You get scalability that you probably didn't have, and the vendor certainly didn't have it with the on-premise model. And I'd never tell anyone to stay on a 15-year-old on-premise system just because. That's not the argument. The argument is this, that cloud migrations are a multi-million-dollar, multi-year decision with consequences that show up 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Now that the honeymoon phase is ending with cloud migration for a lot of organizations, we're starting to see the honeymoon end, and we're starting to see some of the dark sides bubble up and percolate. One of those is the subscription costs keep creeping up. They're already creeping up. You already see Microsoft and SAP and Oracle and others that are increasing their subscription costs. And that's their right to do. You've got inflation, your costs increase over time, et cetera, et cetera. But in this mad dash to get everyone into the cloud and to get everyone onto a common platform, a lot of times what happens is the costs that you use to justify the decision in the first place aren't the costs that you're going to be paying longer term. You're going to end up with higher costs longer term. Now, yes, you can say that you're going to get to outsource your vendor, the vendor infrastructure now, or your infrastructure is now being outsourced to vendors. Yes, that is true. And there might be business value there, but the costs are going up and a lot of customers didn't see that coming. And that's what I always try to do, is just to make sure you see the blind spots of what's coming. And there's also, the idea of the vendor handling all of your infrastructure, your applications, the integrations, all that stuff. That's appealing until you realize that you have no control over when and how and what the upgrades are. And perhaps it starts breaking your integrations. It might start breaking your business processes. It might completely misalign with what it is you need as a business. The vendor's roadmap might diverge from your business needs. And by then, you're in the cloud and it's a lot harder to leave. Your switching costs are a lot higher in the cloud. So my message isn't don't move to the cloud. My message is move with your eyes wide open. Negotiate hard, plan for the long-term cost, keep your data portable, don't fall in love with the marketing. And if you do all those things, and yes, cloud can be great, the net benefit can be great, but you do have to manage those risks. So for example, what are you going to do with the fact that you are potentially eliminating all the customization that you used to build your business over the last 10 or 20 years? How are you going to address that? What are you going to do with the fact that you no longer have the same flexibility that you had with on-prem? You can talk all you want about the vendor having best practices and just forcing a standard across the organization, but that sounds a lot better in theory than in reality. We see so many organizations that struggle mightily with that exact thing. So I think that's the big takeaway here, is that you want to go in with your eyes wide open and have a clear sense of what the risks are so that you can mitigate them and know and make deliberate decisions that make the most sense for your organization. What software vendors would love more than anything is for all of us here to say, yep, we're down with the cloud. We're ready to go. We're going to throw out the technical debt, all the old customization. Now we're going straight to cloud. We're not going to ask any questions. We're going to double down on the cloud. I mean, that's sort of a dream scenario for vendors. And that's why you hear so many vendors and consultants that work with the vendors telling you the same thing. And so our job, because we're not affiliated with any of the software vendors, we're independent, tech agnostic. Our job and our luxury is that we can state the truth. We can state the reality of these projects, because we're not trying to sell you software. We don't make money off people buying software or not. So all we make money off of is helping clients deliver business outcomes. And some in the industry don't like that. So that's the takeaway that I wanted to make there. And it actually ties into another thought here, another area I wanted to share here. And this is a LinkedIn post, and I'm going to pull up the person's name here. If I can see, it's from Venkat Vaisa on LinkedIn. It looks like he's an SAP consultant or somehow affiliated with the SAP ecosystem. And he put this post in response to some of the blowback and some of the negative fallout from SAP's recent policy to restrict API usage within the SAP ecosystem. And in particular, what they're trying to do is somewhat limit the use of third-party AI tools. And this is something that I've talked about in the last couple of weeks, because I think it's a healthy conversation to have. And I actually appreciate that he posted this, even though I don't agree at all with this post. But I appreciate that he's got a counterpoint. He's making an argument for what he thinks, which is, for those of you listening to the audio only version of this podcast, what he says in this post is APIs were built to extend the product, not copy it, wrap it with AI, and sell against it. SAP's new API policy is about stopping these predators. And he highlights in yellow, stopping these predators. I strongly support it. Do you? I had a really strong reaction to this. And again, first, I appreciate his bold statement, and I always appreciate someone, even if I don't agree with them, I appreciate someone that comes out and makes a very clear proposition like this. But what really jumped out off the page of me was the word predators. It's framing people in systems that are trying to access SAP's data. And let me come back to that point. It's not really SAP's data, it's customers' data, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But they're framing people and applications trying to access data in SAP in a way that SAP doesn't sanction or approve. They're framing them as predators. And I have a real problem here, because we're focused on the wrong thing here. If we consider those applications, the people, the actors involved as predators, that means we think that we own the data. We own the tool. And my view is that the customers own it. This is for the customers. This isn't about SAP. This is about SAP's customers, but this entire policy is focused on SAP. And it's a very self-serving policy. I think they're doing their best to try and spin this as something that is meant to, they're hiding under the guise of security, compliance, platform stability, platform integrity. That's complete garbage. This is nothing new. APIs accessing a tool like SAP is nothing new. What I think is new is they are just being bombarded with competitive threats. There's another post I just actually saw today before we came live here on the podcast that shows SAP stock price for the last year, and it's a steady decline over the last 1 year. And you can see that there's something in the investor's mind that they're concerned about. And I think there's some competitive threats that SAP is feeling. And one of them is AI. One of them is the challenge of getting their legacy customers to the cloud. They're still trying their best. They're still working on it. They still have a long ways to go, and they'll probably get there eventually. But it's taking them longer to get their customers to the cloud than they'd like. And now you've got threats from AI, third-party AI tools. And what they want is they want you to use Joule. They want you to use the SAP tool set, which, again, from a pure technologist perspective, you think, well, that's fair enough. Why have multiple tool sets? Why not simplify your architecture? And that may be true from a technical perspective. And my point is that your decision to make as a technologist, or should that be a business decision? And my view of this is a business, it's a leadership decision. And sometimes you can't make the technologist happy if it is what makes your business happy and what makes your business more successful. So I strongly disagree with this comment that these are predators. In fact, if you scroll down in this post here, you'll see my comment here that got a lot of comments and reactions. But what I said is, Venkat, I appreciate your thoughtful analysis. I strongly disapprove of the policy. I think this needs to focus more on innovation and customer choice and less on SAP and its ecosystem. The SAP community often forgets who they are there to serve, customers, not SAP or its customer or its partners. If SAP's product is good enough, they should have full confidence that their customers will choose their products without having to resort to forcing customers into a box. And you can see a bunch of responses back. And I want to give Venkat's response some airtime here too, because his is arguably the most important, because he's the one that opened up the conversation. It says, Eric, I agree customer choice is important, but customer choice also needs governed access, especially when AI tools connect to core enterprise systems. It's about drawing a line between responsible innovation and uncontrolled extraction. I have an issue with that. Uncontrolled extraction. I think if that's your customer's data, which it is, you can do whatever the hell you want with it. I don't think SAP's job is to control extraction. And once they start thinking they can or should do that, then you have to wonder, how much control do you really have over your infrastructure, your processes, your data, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, on he goes to say innovation should be encouraged, but not at the cost of security, governance, and platform integrity. So I appreciate the debate. I still stand by my thoughts and my opinion that SAP should not be governing those things. But I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear the audience thoughts on not just SAP. This isn't an SAP conversation necessarily. This is more of a philosophical discussion around who owns the data. Is it customer data or is it the vendors? And because now we're moving to this cloud model, back to the point of what we're going to talk about with Brad here in a moment. Now that we're moving to the cloud, it's like leasing a car. You're now leasing your software. Your data resides in someone else's cloud, someone else's application that you don't own anymore. So do you really own the data? Do you really own the business processes and the workflows? I think that's the big philosophical debate here. And who should have where should the balance of power reside? Should it be with the vendors? Should it be the technologists that dictate or determine how infrastructure should look? Can they dictate in the name of security and platform integrity that you can or can't access your own data? Even if it's true, which I disagree that it's true. I don't think it's true at all. But let's just say technologically it's true that there is a risk from a platform integrity or a security perspective by having these third-party tools that SAP doesn't sanction. Let's just say there is a risk there. Shouldn't it be the customer's decision to take that risk? If they decide that risk is worth the business value they might get out of having a third-party AI tool or a third-party SAP competitor that is now accessing S/4HANA or your core ERP system, Shouldn't that be their perspective? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because I think this is a big debate. It's a healthy debate, and I'd love to hear both sides. And again, if you have a counterpoint in particular, I'd love to pull that out and have a discussion on that at some point in the future on a future episode. So please drop in the comments what you think about that philosophical debate, why you're thinking about that. Though we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to bring Brad Feakes onto the show. He's going to talk about that whole migration to the cloud, what we should be considering, how to define the right strategy, all that good stuff. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Stick around.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you only attend one event this year, make it Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's our annual flagship conference. It's going to be September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado, the same location as we held it last year. It's 3 days where digital leaders, ERP practitioners, and transformation experts come together for no-spin, vendor-neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. There's no marketing fluff. There's no pay-to-play sponsorships, just real practitioners sharing real lessons. Go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere to learn more and register. Tickets are limited, and these always sell out, and I'd love to see you there. Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with you. Thanks for joining. I've got a great guest here. He's been on the show multiple times in the past, talking about different things, a lot of different stuff ranging from business to technology and everything in between. And we're going to talk with Brad Feakes, who's the president of Estes Group. And we want to talk about navigating the journey to cloud ERP software. And this is going to be particularly relevant for those of you that are beginning or in the middle of a transition from on-premise legacy systems to the cloud, or perhaps you're thinking about it. So with that all being said, Brad, thanks for joining here today.
Absolutely, Eric. Great. Glad to be here.
And I'm gonna turn to the audience here in a few minutes. And in fact, to the audience, or note to the audience, I'd love to hear any questions you have on this topic along the way, any comments you have. If you have any experiences with your journey to the cloud so far, if you're struggling with some issues or challenges, love to hear your feedback on that. We're streaming live to TikTok, to YouTube, to LinkedIn, Facebook, X, just about every platform you can think of. So any questions you have, please drop those in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on all of them. I have to manually look over at my TikTok screen, which is over to my side here. So if you see me looking away, that's what I'm looking at over there. But otherwise, we see every stream or every comment coming through all the streams. I'd love to hear your feedback. But before I get into some more detailed questions for you, Brad, tell me a little bit about yourself and just sort of your backstory, how you grew up in the space. And then I'd love to hear more about Estes Group as well.
Sure. So Estes Group, we've been around a little more than 20 years in the ERP space. My boss, Bruce, our owner, he came from the big ERP, SAP world of the 90s, and then tried to parlay that into more of a mid-market ERP footprint as a implementer and consultant and service provider in the ERP space for mid-market manufacturers, distributors. Myself, I come out of a large customer for a relatively smaller vendor at the time. This was Epicor, circa 2008-ish. I came out of that space. Worked as a analyst for an organization, Epicor customer, eventually transitioned into consulting. That was 13 years ago now. So I've been in the consulting space now and working through cloud ERP. I would say cloud ERP was something that was present in my life as soon as I hopped out of my on-premise environment into consulting. So been able to watch that evolution over time as things have slowly morphed. I like to think of it as, remember Austin Powers, the scene where he rolls over the guy with the steamroller, right? It's this very slow kind of glacial movement, but the impact is significant eventually. It just takes time. So I've been watching that steamroller slowly move across the screen here. And that's, I guess, my story of cloud ERP in a nutshell.
It's funny. I was just thinking about Austin Powers the other day. I was thinking about how it's been a while since I saw it. And there's something about Austin Powers. I think it's because it came out right when I was starting my career, like in consulting. And so there were just so many references to Austin Powers because it was so popular at the time.
Sure.
So it does remind me of early in my career. My favorite scene, just by the way, totally off topic, but my favorite Austin Powers scene, I think, is the one where I think it's the first Austin Powers where he's in the casino and he's like with the guy with a patch on his eye. The guy's got like a 3D patch. and he can see what the dealer has at a blackjack table. So the guy like has a 16, I think is what he's handed. And so he hits. He says, I want to hit because he sees that the dealer has a 5. And the dealer's like, you shouldn't do that. And so the guy turns to Austin Powers and says, well, I like to live dangerously. And then, he hits, he gets blackjack. And then Austin Powers gets a hand that's a 5. And he says, I'll stay. I too like to live dangerously. And that's, so anyway, I don't know why that scene is so memorable to me. But again, totally off topic, although I'm sure I could find a way to tie that scene to ERP and digital transformation. But when did you become, so you're president of Estes Group now. When did you become president? How did you start at Estes Group? Because you weren't
So first off, all of my favorite Austin Powers scenes are not work appropriate. So we'll cut that conversation short. They don't make them like that anymore. Yeah, I know. So I've been president now the last 4 or 5 years. I came on first as a application consultant, just worked the consultant trade for several years, kind of found my way finding other things to do along the way, worked on technical direction and management of technical operations for a while and consulting manager. Eventually found myself in the place of president. Bruce wanted to spend more time in the sailboat and less time in the boardroom. So he found a likely sucker to take his place. And that was me.
Yeah. And just as a side note, Bruce has been sort of an informal mentor to me over the last 20 years that I've known him. So he's been a super good person to know in the industry. And that's how, our relationships have flourished and developed over the years too. So it's good to have you here again. And then same to the audience too. If you've got any questions related to cloud, or if you just want to share your favorite Austin Powers scene, you can do that as well. You can talk about whatever you want. It's your chat, but I want to get started on a few questions here, and then I'd love to turn to the audience here as soon as you've got some. But so just to set the stage, when we look at where we're headed, I mean, I think there's really no doubt, and our intent here today is not to discuss the merits of cloud or whether or not the industry should be moving to the cloud. That's where we're going, whether you like it or not, that's where we're going. But how would you describe the current state of the cloud ERP market, and why are there still so many customers that feel stuck like that, like not knowing what to do, or maybe struggling to get their cloud migrations off the ground? What are some of the big pain points you're seeing?
Sure. So I would say, like we've said, it's something that's become an inevitability in a lot of verticals. And I think probably the fact that it wasn't always anticipated as an inevitability at earlier stages in that life cycle. When I first jumped into consulting, and there was still a much broader tilt towards on-premise and private cloud installations of ERP systems, you saw there's a lot of customer base that was still very much in that mindset that has been inside of ERP for 20 years prior to that, an on-premise mindset where you own that application, its deployment, its unique configuration, it's configured around your company. And that all relates to a lot of what we've sometimes called technical debt.
Now let's hold on for a second here. Let me pause for a second on something that Brad just said. He used the term technical debt. And if you've been around the enterprise tech space for a while, you've probably heard it thrown around a lot. But a lot of leaders and even IT teams use it loosely without really understanding what it means or why it matters. So I wanted to break it down with you. Technical debt is the accumulated cost of every shortcut, customization, workaround, and we'll fix it later sort of decision that you've made in your technology stack over the years. And one way to think about it is like a credit card. Every time you customized a field, you bolted on a third-party tool, you skipped a software upgrade or duct tape an integration to keep things running, you swiped that credit card, you added to your technical debt. Now, the decision worked at the moment. It solved a short-term problem. The business kept moving, but that bill kept accumulating in the background, gathering interest and gathering exponential interest over time. And just like a credit card, that debt comes due eventually. Usually it comes due when you try to do something big, like move to the cloud, upgrade to a new ERP system. You want to integrate AI tools, or if you want to switch vendors. That's why so much of this is being exposed right now. This whole concept of technical debt is becoming such a big deal because all of those individual decisions from the last 10 or 20 years now are stacking up into one massive expensive obstacle. And it's actually preventing a lot of organizations to move to the cloud. You think about all the companies that are struggling right now with how are we going to clean up that customization? How are we going to go clean core and get rid of some of that standardization? How are we going to change our people to fit this new cloud standard that we're moving to? How are we going to clean up that data to ensure that the reports and the analytics and the AI tools can actually be of value to us? Those are all things that Didn't happen overnight. It's not a problem that popped up last year and here we are dealing with it. This is stuff that accumulated over decades in many cases. And here's the real world impact. Technical debt is the number one reason cloud migrations take longer than expected. It's the number one reason why vendor upgrades blow up the budgets. It's a big reason why simple integrations can take 6 months instead of 6 weeks. The debt was always there. The migration just brought it to the surface and forced it into the light. So when Brad talks about technical debt, he's not just throwing on a buzzword. He's describing the single biggest hidden cost in every cloud migration happening right now. And I think it's really important to pay attention to this concept because on one hand, I've been somewhat critical of the concept because I think it does have a fear-based FOMO angle to it, but there's also truth to it too. I think you have to look at what technical debt you have, and you may or may not choose to pay off that technical debt in the near future. You may decide, you know what, it's worth hanging on to that technical debt. Maybe you have other priorities, you have other capital investments that are more important for you to make with limited resources. That's fine, but you do need to recognize that it is technical debt. At some point, you'll have to pay it back. The million-dollar question, though, will be, is it time to pay it back now? Is there an incremental way to partially pay it off now to move towards that direction? Or do we kick the can down the road, or do we jump in full force to do it right now? There's a lot of different answers you might come to, a lot of different conclusions, but either way, it's really important to understand the concept. It's going to come up over and over in today's conversation, I have a feeling, and it's definitely going to come up in your own project as well.
The idea that the decisions you make about how you configure, deploy, install, integrate an application come with a cost. And eventually you have to pay that cost. And depending on the decisions you make, that debt, that cost can be much larger. And I think if there's uncertainty right now, it's really a matter of anxiety of customers who are in spaces where their decisions of the past, which very much at the time might have been the appropriate decision to make given the information available, now are showing to have a significant cost, and the debt is coming due. So I think I see customers struggling, trying to figure out, how am I going to absorb this debt at this point now? And that debt might come in the form of having to get upgraded, having to change how you're accessing data, having to do about where your data is located and what degree of control you have over it, how you integrate your ERP system with other applications, how you manage things like performance and access. There are a tremendous number of things that are moving from an internal sphere of control to a much more external sphere of control. And that shift is monumental.
Now, I want to add one more point here to what Brad just said. I want to do a quick myth bust. Cloud migration is not a technology project. It's a control transfer. Most companies frame cloud migrations as we're moving our software from our servers to the vendor services or to the vendor servers. That's the IT department view. That's a technologist view of cloud migrations. But the reality is much bigger. When you move to cloud ERP, you're handing over a list of decisions that used to be yours and are no longer going to be yours. So for example, when you upgrade, you don't necessarily get to choose when you're going to upgrade now. Some vendors do have a staging process where you can choose within a certain window of time when you want to accept those changes, but they certainly don't give you into infinity to accept those upgrades. And in many cases, it's a very short window, narrow window. And in some cases, you have no window. It's just that the change happens overnight. You may or may not hear about it, but you're going to deal with the fallout in the new way of working. You think about like if you have a smartphone, an iPhone or whatever it is, you think about all the times you just get on the phone and you realize the button moved or that the font changed or this new app that just appears on my phone occasionally. There's a lot of things that you don't have control over on your phone. And, yeah, we fumble through it. We get by day to day. But when you talk about it at a business level where there's end-to-end ramifications to a business process or workflow, that can be very disruptive. Just the smallest little change to the software that the vendor didn't necessarily tell you about, but it shows up in your software one Monday morning when you go to log in and it breaks your entire process. That's a big deal. And that's something that we don't talk about enough in this industry. And again, I'm not saying don't go to the cloud, but you do need to be aware that that risk is there. What gets changed in the software, the type of functionality you see today is not what the software is going to look like in 1, 2, 5, or 10 years from now. It's going to look very different. Now, the question is going to be, is that software going to continue to evolve and change in a way that supports your business, or are you going to run into a divergence between where your business is headed and where the software is going? It's impossible that the software is going to change in a way that keeps all their customers happy and satisfies the needs of their entire customer base. We also have to look at how the data is structured. Now that's the vendor's call. What integrations are allowed. Increasingly, that's the vendor's call too, as we talked about earlier in this episode. So you're not just buying software anymore, you're renting access to a system the vendor controls, and that vendor's interests are not always aligned with yours. So this isn't a reason not to move to the cloud. The cloud has some real benefits, but go in with your eyes wide open. The day you sign that subscription is the day that you stop being a customer and start being the user. So you just want to plan accordingly. And I think we're seeing a lot of the dark side of this now with vendors making unilateral decisions that might not even satisfy a majority of their customers, let alone all of their customers. So I think that's just something you need to be aware of. You have to have strong governance in place. Be ready to be a change management machine, because change management is going to be even more important over time, because the technology is going to continue to change at a breakneck speed. And now you don't have the luxury of being able to say, hold on, I'm going to slow down my pace of change and pace of my own change. You're going to move at the vendor's pace, especially if you're in the cloud. So important point to clarify in terms of what Brad is saying here.
Implications to the organization, how to pull that off while reducing risk, but at the same time, just the paradigm changes that come from no longer being able to treat your application as an in-house on-prem application. That there's a lot of change management that I think comes along with that.
Yeah. So many things came to mind as you were describing that, or as you were answering that question. So I'm trying to figure out where to start. So, I mean, first of all, you mentioned how you had a really good point early in that response about how early on it wasn't 100% clear that we're all going to the cloud, whether we like it or not. There was a lot of even vendor ambiguity or uncertainty as to, yeah, we've got our on-prem over here, but we've got this really cool cloud solution over here that's even better. It's kind of started off as more of a positive sales message, and then it turned into, well, we can't really maintain multiple systems over time. So eventually we're going to have move everything to the cloud. And, you sort of saw that vendors work through their own journeys of like, do we really believe in a dual model deployment, multiple deployment options? And for a while, SAP, Epicor, others said, no, we'll give customers the option to stay on-prem or go to the cloud. And then eventually, a lot of the vendors have said, okay, well, you can have on-prem now, but eventually we're going to stop supporting it, and then you're going to have to be in the cloud if you want, the latest and greatest, innovations and that sort of thing. So I think even the vendors themselves, if they're being honest, they didn't fully understand either that, 10 years ago, I don't think they knew that here we are in 2026 and we're going to the cloud. We're all going there. And I think that's a big part of it too. And so I think a lot of customers were kind of waiting to see. And to your point, now you look up and say, oh crap, I've only got a couple of years to get off my on-prem system if I want to have support. And so I've got to figure out how to untangle all that technical debt. And that's where, I'm curious to hear what you think on this concept of technical debt. One thing that I've been percolating in my brain lately as I think through this is the term technical debt. You and I were talking about this right before we went live. I've softened it up a little bit in my view of the term technical debt. When I first heard it, I thought, okay, that's complete garbage. It's just a marketing message. It's fear-based marketing at its finest, whatever. But, the more, you and I have both looked into it, and there's a whole backstory to it. There is a logic to what technical debt means. But I think where a lot of our customers struggle is that it's not all technical debt. Like maybe on the surface it is, because like, for example, customization, like I customize the solution to do something that preserves my secret sauce, but now it's technical debt, in the world of the technical lens. But in reality, from a business perspective, it might actually be my intellectual property or my competitive differentiator. Maybe it is my secret sauce, but it's still technical debt. How do you see customers struggling with that, or have you run into that a bit in your experience recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've characterized it well, that what you call a differentiator or a core competency, depending on how it gets instantiated, can become technical debt. And I think there's a truth that debt accumulates no matter what you do. So there's some degree where you just have to accept that reality. I could think of the simplest case of, I'll use Epicor as that's my background. They moved from a Progress-based, 4GL-based back end to a Microsoft-based, SQL Server-based server architecture of the application. It was a phenomenally significant change and transformative for Epicor, but it created all kinds of technical debt for customers who were living in that old world where they had developed business critical internal applications and functionality. None of that spoke to the new world. So it all had to be transformed or dropped out. So there's definitely a sense there when the underlying architecture shifts from underneath you, whatever you've done tends to have some amount of debt that comes along with it. And that for customers, you really try to find ways. I had one customer who had a rule that every customization becomes an integration. And that said is anytime we need to deviate the system, instead of building it into the system, whether or not the vendors' toolkits allow that, we're going to find a way to stick that into an external, either like a function library, an API call, or a third-party application. So they would have a system, an application layer that was much more, it had a much more best of breed tendency to it. But what that avoided is the technical debt now is all at the external integration layer and not internal to the application. And I think if you are an organization with savvy integration architects and engineers, that's a way to skirt some of those challenges and still keep that mission critical functionality. I think this goes back to some earlier conversations we've had about best of breed versus all-in-one solutions. So when you take that direction of if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it inside the application. While that has long been the preferred strategy, I think it comes with a layer of technical debt that only gets surfaced by these significant seismic shifts, whether it's from one platform to another, or if it's a cloud platform from an on-prem. Some of those situations find themselves surfaced.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think customers we work with, we try to help them differentiate and bifurcate the two. There's usually two buckets of customization. You have the bucket over here that I was referring to that's more like, okay, you have unique aspects of your business model that no off-the-shelf software is going to be able to handle. So you customized over here. Let's set that aside for a minute. Over here, though, you've probably got a bunch of customization that you didn't really need. Maybe it's questionable whether or not you should have customized in the first place. You're automating or you were customizing things that was more of a symptom of resistance to change. Like you could have changed the way you do your period end close process, but you chose to customize it to reflect the old spreadsheet way that you did it before. So you kind of look at those and say those are the ones you really want to focus on. Untangle those. That's the great opportunity to move to a standard cloud solution. But then it still leaves you this bucket over here of like, okay, you've got these really important high value areas of customization. Yes, it's technical debt, but it's maybe high business value. Now you've got to figure out what are you going to do with that? Are you going to have some sort of extension or platform bolt on that you can, now customize outside the system, or do you find a third party bolt on that will just handle that specific use case and integrate back to the core ERP without having to break the core ERP? And that's, I think, where a lot of customers struggle is they don't know, like, well, I don't know what to do or how to approach it. And I'm never going to find, and this has always been the case, I'm never going to find that one ERP system that does everything I need. You couldn't do it 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You still can't do it today. That's
right. And the people factor is so big there.
So just to build on what Brad was saying here, let me give you a framework I use with every client when we talk about customization. And there's two buckets and you have to know which one is which. And I'll try to keep this as simple as possible. But bucket number one is bad customization. This is the stuff you customized because you didn't want to change period end close processes you customized to look like your old spreadsheet, the approval workflow you customized to match the way you've always done it, the field you added because someone in accounting demanded it 12 years ago, but you can't remember why. You can't even remember who demanded it. These are symptoms of resistance to change. And those are the things you want to get rid of. Cloud migrations are your opportunity to clean house. And to be fair, there are a lot of bad customizations. Like you look at any organization and all the customization they did, it's either it was a good idea at the time, but now the need for that customization perhaps is obsolete, or in some cases the customization was never a good idea. It was just a band-aid. It was just a way to avoid the conflict or avoid the resistance to change. And so you go in and change the software to make it look like the old spreadsheet or the old legacy system. So that's the good news, is there is a lot of cleanup you can do with bad customization. Now, the tricky part is identifying what is truly the good customization. And I know some of you listening might be cringing saying, Eric, you're crazy. There's no such thing as good customization. Well, there is a good thing. There is such a thing as good customization. This is the stuff that's your competitive advantage. It's your unique scheduling logic, your industry specific or your organization specific configuration that no vendor best practice will ever be able to replicate. It's the thing your customers actually pay you for. It's the thing that your competitors can't do. And maybe their ERP systems can do what they do, but those ERP systems can't do what you do. So this is your moat. This is your secret sauce. You need to defend it. And the mistake that most companies make is they treat these two buckets the same way. And it's an all or nothing, black and white proposition. Either they keep everything and the technical debt explodes, or they get rid of everything in the name of the clean core and they lose their competitive edge. And the right answer is a lot more nuanced than that. It's a lot more trickier than that. Because if I'm going to choose one or the other, I'm probably just going to say, well, just get rid of everything. Let's just get rid of all that customization and start from scratch, go to clean cores, fit to standard, all that stuff. Vendors will love it. That's the vendor's dream, is that you all look and act the same, because they can scale their product better and deliver their product better to you if you all look and act the same. The problem is we live in a global, competitive, capitalistic world, and especially in the private sector, the for-profit sector, organizations look different, and that's okay. You want them to look different. They will always look different. They will always strive to be different because they want to beat their competition. They're not going to win in business by being the same as everyone else and using the same vanilla ERP system. So the right answer to this whole customization debate is pretty surgical and targeted. You want to burn the bad customization, defend the good customization, and for the good stuff, put it outside the core ERP system using integrations, extensions, or best of breed bolt-ons. That way your core stays clean and your differentiation stays intact. So there's two buckets. You just want to know which is which. And I think that's an important add-on to what Brad is saying here.
I see a lot of customers who have, say, 20-year-old ERP systems, and there have been 3 IT directors since then. So the IT director who currently has inherited this system has a whole set of the technical debts, even kind of at a next level, because they don't even know what their debt is yet, because the solutions of the past are implemented and oblivious to an end user as to what is core functionality and what is custom, may not have been documented well. So they have a whole slew of tangled webs that they haven't yet unraveled. And I think that creates a lot of concern for the ERP community when they have inherited systems like that. And it's always a challenge to separate core capability or differentiator from the way we've always done it, right? We talk about those abstractly when you're in a boardroom full of people and there's emotions and cheese is getting moved, to use an old reference. Folks get steamy and those things get hard to differentiate. But the challenge is those customizations, quite often the system gets configured around them. So if you say, well, I'm going to move and I'm going to pull out all those customizations that were nice to haves or the way we've always done it, the problem is it creates new gaps, because your whole ERP system, in terms of your setup, your company setup, configuration settings, product master, customer, supplier, et cetera, have all been built around a certain set of assumptions. Now you pull out those assumptions because they're not needed anymore. You have to find a way to fill that gap. So you find customers landing in a re-implementation mode where this change now mandates that I re-implement the software from ground up and try to avoid some of those configuration customization challenges that belabored me 20 years ago. And that becomes a big investment for a lot of customers.
Yeah. I want to go to a comment that we got over here on TikTok. Rich on TikTok says, technical debt isn't real. Arrives in green screen CRM system written by Dave in 1984 in 4GL. So I think he might be being facetious there, talking about the green screen system. Sounds like he's got some real experience with it there too. Rich also says there's always one field to remove in that scenario that somehow is a load-bearing structure. And that's a really interesting analogy. When you do try to change something, whether it's customizing the software or take something out of an end-to-end process. I mean, I like that load-bearing structure analogy there, because that is true in a lot of ways. I mean, to your business, at least, it's going to be load-bearing, and perhaps technologically it might be load-bearing too, in terms of the way the software is built. Have you run into any, like, in the last couple of years, have you come across any really big, like, heavy sorts of lifts in terms of like gnarly customization over here, homegrown functionality that now you're trying to move over to an Epicor or a core ERP system?
I think so. I think quite often those can be things that are fundamental. You talked about classifications of customization. Sometimes a big classification is the automation features, is that companies, when they're operating offline, can do a lot of things in batches and bundles, and Epicor ERP systems in general tend to be very discrete. They handle each entity as a unique unit. So to be able to transact on a bunch of things in an old system that wasn't as rigid, you could make major large-scale transactions, process an entire sales order, for instance, and then process that through one complete work order, whereas a modern system would want to have a bunch of discrete line items. And now if you want to handle those and process them all together, you need to find a way of batching that. And there might be the need for customizations to wrap around that. So a lot of order to cash cycle processing where transactional load is a non-negotiable for the customer tend to create load-bearing situations where if I was going to do this manually, this would be 3 or 4 additional people and the company doesn't have budget for that. Those become real critical challenges for customers who find migrating to the future comes with increased user transactional impact. And those can be very painful because those become very emotional and personal at the same time.
Yeah. Great points. Here's a comment from Patrick on LinkedIn. I'm trying to pull up the comment here. Let's get the elephant out on the elephant out on the table right away. But Patrick asks on LinkedIn how to avoid vendor lock-in moving ERP to cloud. And that's maybe if you don't mind, just tell us real quickly, vendor lock 101. What does it mean, and how can customers ensure that they don't feel or in reality aren't too locked into one vendor?
Boy, vendor lock-in. First, if you get the elephant on the table, you better have a strong table, or a small elephant.
I'm the worst person in cliches. You'll find. I'm sure that's not the first time you and I have talked where I've completely screwed up a cliche like that. I'm like, you want to get the 800-pound elephant? No, is it gorilla, elephant, whatever?
Now I'm doing Mortal Kombat with an elephant on one side and a gorilla on the other, but my brain goes into strange places. Vendor lock-in is really hard because the ERP system is so core to your business processing. So if you are avoiding vendor lock-in, I guess you could say a strategy would be, and we've talked about this, about best of breed is one way of avoiding keeping all of your eggs in one basket. The payments, the debt that comes with that is the management of that integration ecosystem of keeping all those things speaking to one another. If you are in a business environment where you can utilize a system out of the box as much as possible, I would say the most transportable customers are the least customized customers. So that's an interesting little duality is, ERP vendor doesn't want you to badly customize the system, but the reality is if you do, that makes you a more sticky customer because it's harder to plug and play, lift and shift yourself out into a new ERP system because your paradigms are now so intrinsically bound to that system. So again, if you're able to do what that one customer example of mine did and keep those real nuanced functionalities outside of the base system, I think that makes you more, what's the term, interoperable? Isn't that a fancy term? Makes me sound smart. I'll use that more here. Interoperable. Sounds
very consultant-esque.
Exactly. I can charge $220 an hour now.
Yes. And build a PowerPoint that has that word on it. Totally credible at that point. No, that's a good point. I hadn't actually thought of that about the fact that both scenarios, you could go totally clean core, standard ERP, not customize anything, and you're still somewhat locked in some ways because it's just hard to move cloud to cloud, right?
Well, and not to mention, we talk about contracts, 5 to 7 year contracts are what vendors are pushing these days. So it's hard to avoid some form of lock-inness. I know in my case, I was, as a company, we were locked into a CRM system that we were very unhappy with. And we had a year and a half of dissatisfaction before we were able to pull out and find a new direction. But that's kind of the name of the game these days. If you're licensing a enterprise system, you're going to find yourself with some term limits. So I'd say one way of avoiding that is trying to see what options vendors have by way of term contracts for sure.
So we're going to pick up on this conversation, continue with Brad here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Stick around. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
So just building on what Brad just said, here's a contrarian view that's going to upset a lot of the clean core true believers out there. The people that are drinking the clean core Kool-Aid are not going to like this. But going vanilla does not mean you're less locked in. If you go with that clean core, that fit to standard approach, it doesn't mean you're less locked in. The industry has done a fantastic job convincing customers that if they just follow the vendor's playbook with no customization, clean core, standard processes, they'll be free to move vendors whenever they want. And that's not true. But Brad nailed it when he said you might be more technically portable, but you're still locked in by all these other things like 5 to 7 year contracts. Good luck trying to get out of one of those early. It's nearly impossible the way they're written. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of litigation in the future around this. In fact, that's a topic we'll cover on a future podcast, is just the legal ramifications of some of these long-term contracts that customers are signing up for right now. There's also subscription lock-in. You stop paying. If you stop paying, you're going to lose access. I'm still waiting to hear about a high-profile company that runs into a cash flow problem, not because I want them to struggle, but because I want to see what happens with their ERP system usage. So you're paying month to month, year to year, quarter to quarter. God forbid you run into a situation where you can't pay your bill. What happens then? The vendor technically and contractually has the right to shut off your access to the ERP software, which, surprise, surprise, all of your data, all of your operations reside in that system. So just think about that for a minute. Imagine that day coming where something happens. You have another COVID. You have a terrible economy. A competitor comes in and disrupts your business, and revenue starts dropping, and you've got to cut costs. Now you're in a position where you can't. I mean, you just can't cut your cloud subscriptions. And I worry that it's going to come in the form of, cost savings in the future will come in the form of more jobs lost and more people being impacted, because organizations just simply won't have the option to get out of their subscription lock-in. So that's something you've got to keep in mind as well. And so if there's a way to negotiate continued access for at least a period of time in the event of some sort of default on payment for your subscriptions, that is something that I would think about. It may not be top of mind now, but at some point in the future, it could be an issue. data export. Try getting clean exports of years and years of historical data out of those cloud systems to move to a new system. I don't think it's going to be as easy as some may think, and it never was easy. I mean, even in the old on-prem model, it wasn't easy. It's definitely not going to be easy in the cloud environment. It's probably going to be more difficult. And then you also have process dependence. Your entire organization is now configured around vendor defined workflows. And then switching means retraining thousands of people on a different vendor's workflow. So you'll be in a position where if the vendor's processes and workflows change in a way that doesn't align with your business in the future, you're going to be forced with the decision of, well, do we just deal with it and let the fallout happen operationally? Or do we go through the pain of now having to migrate to a new system because we think there's another system out there that might be able to handle those needs better? I don't know where this is going to go, 10 to 15 years from now. Every 10 to 15 years, I feel like there's a big upgrade cycle that happens, new technologies, new versions of software, et cetera, et cetera. We're still in the middle of this big initial cloud 1.0 migration for the most part. We don't know what cloud 2.0 is going to look like, and we don't know how that migration is going to go. And I think that's where the real pain is going to come in. So until we get there, we're not going to know, but it is something we have to think about. What is that uncertainty and that lack of clarity on the horizon, and how can we plan around that? So the cleaner your implementation, the more your business has been shaped by the vendor. So you think about that. If you do all the things the vendor is telling you, the more they are shaping your business rather than you shaping your business in your customers in your marketplace shaping your business. And I would argue that's way more important, is to have your customer voice framing and shaping how you run your business, not a vendor and the limitations and the strengths of that vendor. So that's lock-in that's way deeper than any sort of code customization. So you just want to be sure you don't fall for these false promises that vanilla is somehow going to protect you, because it doesn't. You want to negotiate hard on contract terms. You want to make sure you've got data portability, build integrations on open standards, and keep at least some independence in how you run your business, because the day you can't leave is the day your renewal pricing gets very, very expensive. And that's what the vendors are banking on. They're banking on high switching costs and leverage that gives them the pricing leverage in the relationship. And that's good for them. That the investors like it. It drives up their stock price, their profitability. Executives get bonused on it. So everyone on the vendor side is winning if you get locked in to a situation where they shape your business outcomes and they have the pricing power and leverage as well. So something to keep in mind there as we continue the conversation here. Scott on LinkedIn says decoupled customization. That's what I'm talking about. Great conversation. So thank you for that. And then there's another question here from, bear with me here, on TikTok. This is from Brian. Brian says, thoughts on concerns of cybercrime and rise in ransoms on cloud services impacting manufacturing. So maybe could you address just the whole cybersecurity, ransom, all that piece of it? Are you seeing an uptick in cybersecurity issues with so many customers now moving to these central cloud solutions? It's on one hand creating a certain amount of scalability for vendors, to where they can provide massive functionality to a larger number of customers than they may have been able to in the past. But at the same time, it's also creating a bullseye for cybersecurity, potential cybersecurity attacks and whatnot. So how are you seeing that in the manufacturing space in particular?
Honestly, and we do a fair bit of work inside of managed services. So I do see a fair number of cybersecurity incidents and such that we get brought in to help mitigate. I would say in my own small experience, it's always on-prem related to. So we had a history of moving ERP systems into private cloud environments. And quite often the nexus, the genesis of that was the fact that someone had gotten ransomed and had to move off of their hardware into the cloud. So it was honestly, on-prem tended to be the biggest driver of cybersecurity ransomware concerns. I think there's certainly a risk with these large systems. One is to make sure that your vendor is doing due diligence to ensure that penetration of one company, if a bug or what have is able to impersonate a user and get into their instance, that they're not able to hop cross instances and create, data related challenges across instances or infect the underlying hardware. If you're in a multi-tenant environment where you have shared resources, like, this was a point I was thinking about. One of the reasons that companies are moving to cloud-based deployments is the obvious economies of scales you get in multi-tenancy, where you can take shared resources and subscribe them with multiple clients. The risk that comes with that, of course, is that if multiple clients are sitting on the same physical or virtual server, if that server gets compromised through whatever means, there's a risk that a whole bundle of customers now are down as a result. I haven't seen that in practice a whole lot. So it's much, for me right now, it's more of a matter of risk than it is a matter of actuality. You want to make sure, ransomware is always a matter of backup and disaster recovery. What is your plan for how to recover and spin up new environments when has been compromised? So you really want to beat on your vendor to understand what they're doing for you as part of that, subscription package, because you're not just buying functionality, you're buying it in a manner that's secured.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I always noticed or think about is how if, because the ones, and I'm with you, by the way, we don't have any, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. We do have one client, but it was a legacy environment. They did have a ransomware situation, but it was on their legacy environment, not their future state that we were helping them migrate to. But other than that, I don't have direct client experience with someone having gone through that. But we've all read about some of these large companies that have had cybersecurity breaches and attacks. And so that leads you to think, well, if these big companies with presumably very sophisticated IT departments and robust cloud environments and a lot of resources at their disposal, if even they are facing challenges or they're becoming a bullseye for cybersecurity attacks, I'm not saying just forget about it because it doesn't matter, but it just goes to show how big of a deal it is and how big of a risk it is. It's not very common, but when it does happen, it can be a pretty big deal. And so I think, to your point, just making sure you have a modern system with cybersecurity standards and best practices can go a long way towards that.
Absolutely.
What about, here's a really good question around, this is from Megan on LinkedIn. He says, where's the line between a customization that's worth the debt and one that isn't? Is there a test or a litmus test you walk clients through before they say yes to a custom build?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Where that litmus line gets written. I would say one piece is whether it's being done using the native functionality of the system such that it has a better chance of upgradability and transportability. Every ERP vendor offers some degree of tailoring, and the more that it's, how would you say, client side is maybe the term, or maybe that's a bad term, but the less that it affects core system logic, the more likely it is to be transportable and have lower levels of debt over time. A challenge, of course, is if your vendor is changing those toolkits from version to version. So that's probably one of the considerations when you're talking to your vendor, to ensure that the systems you're using to fine tune and tailor your application don't have a bad shelf date. Right? They're not going to spoil on you before you get them in the refrigerator. I would say that's one piece. And really, there's a value proposition of how much value does this thing bring, such that it can offset some of that debt that you're looking to. If you're doing something and you don't have a great sense of how much value it's bringing out of the gate, you probably have an issue with your governance model to begin with. So I think that's definitely out of the gate. But to say bluntly, I think that litmus line is very hard to find, and I think that's a constant struggle with organizations, especially because you customize the system and then you go live and you realize which customizations you really needed and which ones were useless and ineffective. The best specification happens after you've been live a couple of months and have been feeling the real pain of going live. So I always try to push as much of that customization decision making into phase 2 so that you can do it with a little more of a clear line of sight as to what's really hurting your organization, where the real pain points and where the benefits are. Because again, if you wrap those customizations around real tangible benefit, that can outweigh some of the debt that you might later experience.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think that you hit the nail on the head toward the end of that response around business case and business value. If the business case and business value is there, that might be more, that might outweigh the technical debt you're taking on. But you also bring up a good point here is into Megan's question, back to Megan's question, there's not one answer to solve that area that actually could deliver business value. You could do customization in the system. You could do a third-party bolt-on, like you said, more of a best-of-breed environment where you get a third-party system that's really good at handling this one piece of your business, integrate it back to your ERP system. It is introducing a certain amount of technical debt because now you've got to manage that integration point. It's another potential point of failure. but it might be that the business value justifies it. But I think that's the key, is you have to know what the business value is. If the business value is not there, then you really have to question why are we doing this? Like, what's the point? Maybe it's just, I don't want to say it's just a people issue, because that's a big deal, but maybe it's a change management issue, and we need to focus more on helping people through the change to understand the new processes. That won't always work, but for a lot of customization demands, that could be. The other thing too that I think is worth noting is that there's a whole movement in the industry toward, platform as a service and more platform based deployments. And you look at, there's some platform as a service standalone platforms, but you also have vendors like Odoo and Salesforce, NetSuite is starting to move this direction as well, just to name a few, where they're selling not only apps, but they're selling the platform that you can build on. So you could build a third-party app in their platform that doesn't customize the core app per se, but you're building an extension or a customization based on common tools that integrate, it's part of that same platform. So that's another option too. And so there's a lot of different ways you can navigate it, but I think that gets confusing to customers. Like, well, what do I do? Where do I start? How do I decide what stays and goes? How do I decide what to, customize versus a best of breed bolt on? And that's where I think where a lot of them get lost.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's the iPaaS world and integration platforms as a service is very much in movement. So one of the challenges is committing to a solution that is still very much half-baked. I think that's always a big risk. And it makes sense that NetSuite or Odoo would be building that, because that's certainly a piece of the market to gobble up. And I think these organizations are always trying to figure out where's that best space to try and provide that solution to make integration consistent. I think IT directors definitely want minimize point-to-point integrations, where you have a lot of different integrations that integrate in different manners. That can be very maintenance heavy. So trying to find a single version, a single means of making communication makes a lot of sense for folks from a maintainability standpoint. I think technical debt always has to answer the question of maintainability.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question from Muse on TikTok. Muse says, any thoughts on cloud application lifecycle management?
Cloud application lifecycle management.
I've heard the acronym CALM. I know I've heard that acronym. I don't have a lot of background in it. And we can pass on it if you don't know a lot about it. But
I'm going to punt.
Okay, no problem. We punt. It's the beauty of live interviews with a live audience is you don't always have all the answers. Matt on TikTok also says building an iPaaS to bridge some of these gaps is kind of handled the custom but not custom feel. So just a good comment there from Matt. So thank you for that.
That's a good football metaphor. Some people punt, I pass. Never mind. I grew up in Canada where we had the CFL with only 3 downs, so my football knowledge is highly limited. So you might want to just disregard.
Wait, say that again. You only had 3 downs?
3 downs, 3 down football. CFL. Oh, good times. You watch Canadian football. You hardly think it's like rugby with hard narcotics. Perhaps it's a strange sport.
You keep coming back to Canada. You were talking about Austin Powers. Mike Myers is the guy
there
that plays
go.
Austin Powers, Canadian. So you're up northern. You're pretty much in Canada. Where you
all
are
bad
now.
Humor comes from Canada. I'm a firm believer in that.
Yes, that's funny. Well, here's a question from Jacob on YouTube. It says, what are your thoughts on industry best practices based on industry peers of their similar size regarding business processes of these ERP software vendors? So maybe, just broaden that a little bit, or maybe just any thoughts you have on industry best practices as it relates to cloud ERP systems.
Oh boy, industry best practices. That's a term that's lasted probably longer than you and I, Eric. Probably predates us when we were still in high school, throwing paper airplanes and shooting spitballs. The challenge with industry best practices is quite often there's a lot of value in terms of, say, eliminating technical debt, where customers push back. And sometimes with reason, sometimes without, is that those tend to be very transactionally intensive, and they tend not to include business-specific differentiating functionality. So you're always faced with that basic conundrum: is our organization figured out how to engage our market in a special way by doing these special things. Now, how do I blend that with business best practices? Now, if that becomes a business best practice and everybody does it, well, I've just lost my critical differentiator. So that's a problem. But if I don't incorporate it now suddenly my lead times are extended, my functionality to the customer in terms of, say, product configurability has been reduced. Do those things, harm the business significantly, such that the implementation of an ERP system becomes a business downgrade? I've certainly seen that in some cases where an ERP system sets a company back, not because it's a textbook disaster, but just because the functionality that they received did not support the business models that they were trying to implement. So that, I think there's definitely a lot of back and forth to be had there. I think certainly if you can standardize, when you can standardize, you should. But if you're running into those cases where something's out there that you're ahead of the market because of certain things you do, it's very hard for customers to want to give that up.
This is a really interesting conversation. We've got a lot more to get to, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode, you can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 273 already. Time flies when you're having fun, so thanks for being here. We are here with Brad Feakes. We're talking about cloud migrations in the ERP world. The question I have for you, Brad, is that, when you think about these industry best practices and just the cloud migration movement to begin with, we were talking earlier about how 10 years ago, it wasn't 100% clear that we're all going to the cloud. It was a little bit of ambiguity and hedging that the vendors were doing to say, hey, we've got on-prem, we've got cloud. And one of the eye-opening moments for me was actually earlier this year when Epicor, who you work closely with, they were one of the ones that were one of the holdouts, I'd say, to move and to double down on the cloud. They had always given customers the option of on-prem or cloud or some sort of hybrid deployment approach. Well, earlier this year, they announced that they're going to stop supporting on-prem at some point in the future. And we actually had one of the executives from Epicor on this podcast right after that was announced. And then we had the head of the Epicor user group on as well, just to talk about sort of people's reaction to it and what this means for the industry. And I remember at the time, this is probably back in February, I want to say, that when this happened, January, February of this year. And I remember there's a lot of disgruntled Epicor customers on the podcast. In the chat, they were making a lot of comments about how they can't believe this. They really liked having the options. Has that settled down, do you think, in particular in the Epicor space? And is probably your comment will probably apply to other verticals as well, not just Epicor. But I'm curious to hear like your take on the temperature of customers as it relates to cloud. Like, are most customers you talk to, are they excited? Like, yeah, let's do this. We see the benefit of the cloud. We've always wanted to go. We're just a little behind. Or is it more they're begrudgingly moving to the cloud because they know that their options are limited in the old on-prem model?
I would say it's a blend. The customers who are the most sophisticated customers, who are probably the most vocally, publicly disgruntled, tend to not be the ones that come to us looking for help because they have big, well-staffed IT teams that handle the administration of their applications. These tend to be larger customers. So I don't have a great line of sight into that space as much as the mom and pop shops who are kind of playing in between. I would say there's a lot of questions as to how to handle things like mobility, how to handle things like outages. Do I have am I able to work offline and then have that sync back up with the system such that I can have folks working offline in the event of an outage? I think some folks who are in private cloud environments like say Azure or AWS and have experienced outages as a function of that in a private cloud environment have concerns to say, hey, is the public cloud going to be better than that? Do I have those same kinds of downtime concerns? And how do I run my business when downtime is an issue? I think those are common questions that folks are seeing. And I would say lack of information is probably the biggest challenge there. So if I'm making recommendations, the first thing I'm trying to do is, well, let's understand very clearly what the target looks like. What does the future potentially look like for a given organization? And then, clearing out those kinds of questions in terms of how does a cloud system operate. I've seen customers move from an on-premise to a cloud environment, and the end user community feels very little of that transition. I've also seen cases where the transition is much more significant, and quite often the significance is inside of the IT team that's maintaining and supporting that application ecosystem. So first, clarifying the open questions is always kind of the big piece that we find folks looking to do early. And once that's done, then it becomes more of an inventory of your current state to understand how big a deal it really is based on what degree of technical debt you have in terms of customizations, integrations, the version you're on, right? In many spaces, customers are moving. There's a parallel, so cloud is always a shift of the server, right? And the term web user interface is a shift of the client. And those things are integrated and connected, but they also have a certain degree of independence of each other. So if you are on an ERP system that's moving its client applications from a thick client, a fat client, to a browser-based client, that is one thing that can complicate this move, right? You have a lot of things that need to get moved and migrated. So trying to break those up, I think, is really helpful. And as customers understand that, okay, these are all the pieces I need to deal with, the pieces on the board. Once you understand the pieces on the board and the movements you're allowed to make, I think some of that concern goes away. And we've had conversations with customers. They're on a current version. They're on the latest browser-based user interface. Their integrations are all API-based. The cloud is really a very small, what do we say, a weekend in a case of beer kind of migration, right? So to those folks, though, it's not nearly as concerning as it might be. So I would say that as the overall market is coming to understand the implications, some of those concerns are going away. I'm sure in some spaces they're still there.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. What should so with customers that are staring down the barrel of a potential need to move to the cloud, whether they're ready or want to or not, what are some of the first things that customers should do, when they're ready to migrate to the cloud? You and I were talking a little bit about this right before we went live.
Right. So I would say the one is really understanding, as we mentioned, implications, but also options. When we talk about, say, software as a service, right, that's more of a licensure model than it is a deployment model. So a given customer or a given vendor might have multiple deployment models that count as cloud, but have a slightly different swing to them that might allow for different levels of access, control, and scalability and flexibility to a customer. So if you are in the midst of that, you'd be asking your vendor, now, what options are available? Do you have a public cloud version? Do you have a private cloud, or a single tenant version that would give you better data access, better performance monitoring, less risk of oversubscription, et cetera? So understanding if those options are available to you is probably a big deal. Understanding from size of your business, your IT budget, depending on those things, you might be able to scale yourself into a spot that is better to suit your specific company's needs. So that's a big one. First is understanding what are your options available. Once you've chosen an option, really it becomes a roadmap question of what do I need to do to get from where I am right now to get to where I need to be. Fortunately, your vendors tend to give pretty long runways for that transition to happen. So you can work within support windows and chunk up that project into bits. If you're very risk averse and looking to try and minimize that final jump, you can do a lot in the meantime. You can get upgraded to the most recent version, for instance. You can, if you're on, say, a fat client version and you know that you're going to need to be on the browser-based version when you move to cloud, well, get on the browser-based version now. So that's one more factor that's taken off the table. There are different opinions out there about should you make the one big leap, kind of the big bang migration, or should you chunk it up into a lot of little steps and delay that migration till the end? I would say if you're in a risk averse and you have a lot of technical debt, you're probably better suited in mitigating risk by doing it in chunks and trying to build out a project plan, a roadmap that includes all of those chunks that can get you to a spot where your final move to the cloud is as least impactful as possible. I think when customers are taking that approach, some of those pieces are less of a concern. And I'm seeing that with some of our larger customers. They are looking out at the 3-year plan to figure out, okay, I want to be there in 3 years. Let's do what we need to do now to try and make that less of an event. And I think that approach tends to work well for especially larger customers who have a bigger technical debt footprint as a function of size.
Yeah, and you kind of answered my follow-up question to that.
That's my job.
Yeah, which is what would a practical cloud migration strategy look like for a mid-market company that doesn't have a unlimited budget or doesn't have a deep IT bench? He sort of just alluded to the fact that there is no one answer to that question as far as how to begin the journey, what your strategy should be. It's going to depend on a lot of variables, like you mentioned, the risk, your level of risk aversion, how much technical debt you have, maybe how mature you are as an IT organization. A lot of those things can factor into the right approach to get to the same.
Yeah. And I would recommend leaning on the vendor there. Vendors are doing a better job of helping customers with that idea of understanding your technical debt. What do you all have in your system that you need to be concerned about? What are the red flags? Bringing them in, bringing in someone who's from an advisory standpoint who can come in, look at your system and tell you these are the chunks that you need to worry about. This is really important if you have an inherited system, right? Helping them, using them to help flush out just what your challenges are ahead of you. I think vendors are, with the future roadmaps and the mandates come a lot of assistance in trying to make that successful. So I think you really want to try and take advantage of that and work with your account managers and such to understand, hey, what tools and assistance is available for me that can help mitigate some of these concerns and get the pieces on the board early.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a comment from Scott on LinkedIn. Scott says, if I want customization, I'm starting with confirmation bias. I'll seek data points that support my desire. I suspect finding a neutral arbitrator to make the Moscow list is critical. And it goes back to the whole point of like how you draw that line between what should or shouldn't remain customized, because there's probably some you can clean up and get rid of. Some you're going to want to keep, but then the ones you want to keep or you think you need to keep, how you go about keeping it. We talked about some of the different options you have there. Do you see that a lot though, where customers maybe have it in their heads going in that I have to keep this customization and I have no choice? And maybe and that might be true some of the time, but then there's other times where no, you just are resisting change and you just aren't open to the idea that there might be a different way you can handle the same process?
I would say more often than not, I'm observing the opposite strategy where customers are going, I want to try and tidy up my environment as much as possible. There definitely are a surprising number of customizations that I see a customer has done that are no longer in active use, like added fields that no longer get populated, added business logic that no longer gets triggered because the circumstance, the use cases have gone away. So using that as an opportunity to tidy up your environment, clean up, pull out old stuff that no longer needs to be maintained has been a factor that's happened quite frequently in these initiatives to try and get you cloud ready. The truth is what cloud at its best does is it forces you to do a lot of best practices of administration and maintenance of your ERP system that you should have been doing this whole time. Right, you should always be looking to purge your system of unneeded custom business logic that's no longer, in your common use case library. You should always be trying to keep your data clean, try to minimize your level of integration complexity whenever possible. A cloud migration forces practices that you would want to try to instill going forward so that these problems don't, start to snowplow again after the migration. Because I'm sure within a cloud environment, you can create a lot of the same problems that you've had going into it. So, the bright side of this would be is that, on the bright side, you've learned all these good techniques on how to not do the same thing again. I'm sure to a customer that doesn't sound like a benefit, but long term, I think there is some benefits to be seen there.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. Did you used to watch Third Rock from the Sun?
A little bit.
Okay, because I know you're a space. I know you're a Trekkie, like some of the space stuff. But
sure.
The only reason I ask is someone said, "Since when is French Stewart on TikTok?" And that's I'm assuming they're referring to me because they can't see you; they can only see me. So apparently, I might look like French Stewart. I don't know, the guy that he's one of the characters in Third Rock from the Sun. But
I was thinking Patrick Stewart, who plays Picard, who is French and very bald. So that's where my head went. But I think your reference is probably the right one there.
Yeah. No, some good stuff coming up. This another comment here from Rich says requires admitting that years of customization are a problem. So I think in many cases it is, but I think you have an interesting point that there's so many customers that are open to like, let's just clean this up, let's tidy it up. Now I think they might be oversimplifying how difficult that's going to be to clean that up, but I think the intent, they're coming from the same spot from an intent perspective. What about this? This is from Third Stage on their YouTube channel. Asked the question, what should the timeline be for people who haven't yet started the move, but are thinking about doing so?
I guess it depends on if you're in a system where there's a migrated timeline, right? So I would look to that support timeline to understand kind of where that lays out. So if you have, for instance, a 3-year timeline, to get yourself into that position, you'd be looking to work within those parameters. And if you don't have a reason, to incur, let's assume you're coming from a perpetual license where you've already spent the money on a license, right? You're going to want to delay the movement as much as possible because now the subscription kicks in. So now you're paying for something that you had already paid for, right? So companies are trying to push that out as far as possible. Understandably so, they have budgets to manage. Another piece has to do with the software or the hardware that you're sitting on. I've seen customers who are in a situation where their hardware is way past its expiration date. It's held together with bubble gum and duct tape, and they need to make something happen much sooner. So it's very much you were making an on-prem hardware replacement decision 3 years ago. Now it's much more of a cloud migration strategy that you have to be developing. But you really need to understand what's the ticking clock, what's the burning platform, and what's the cost of doing nothing. And if those are prohibitive, you should be aligning your project according to those, given that all the other risk factors and complexity factors and reasonableness of how big a jump that's going to be are taken into account.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good advice. And again, I think one theme that you keep circling around here is that there isn't a one size fits all answer to a lot of these questions. And I think that's why this conversation is so valuable, and hopefully it's valuable to the audience, is just trying to ascertain and hone in on what the right strategy is for you based on who you are as an organization and where you're starting from and where you're trying to go. Where do you see Where do you see companies most often underestimate the complexity of moving to the cloud, whether it's integration, security, data, organizational readiness, or something else, or some combination of all the above?
Boy, I think the first answer would be yes. I'd say the second answer would be unknown unknowns. Complexity that is not yet surfaced. What do you call it? Iceberg complexity, right? You haven't yet rubbed your ship against it. I think those tend to be the biggest challenges when folks are getting there. Organizational readiness. Again, if you stack your risk and your migration steps to a point where the final leap of faith is more of a hop, organizational readiness of your general user base is not going to be as big. I think the key here would be identifying the things that are going to be the biggest change factors to your user base and trying to address those through training, communication, change management principles, whatever else you can early, and getting those on the table. In a lot of cases, that migration won't be present, or will be present only in a small subset of people, maybe power users who are doing a lot of BI related reports, or financial folks who really get at the core data in special ways. Those folks might be specifically. So change management, you might find that needing to be tailored to categories of users, and you might have to use different approaches. Quite often, your own IT department might be the folks who are most perturbed by this transition, and you need to work with them to understand, what's a reasonable set of go forwards in spite of frustrations with the direction itself.
Yeah. When you and I were talking right before we went live to the audience here, as we were prepping, we were talking about how cloud migrations in a lot of ways are exposing the things that we should have been doing 10 or 20 years ago. There's a lot of foundational stuff you want to have in place in order to make that migration to the cloud. But a lot of that foundational stuff is the same stuff that you and I and others have been advising people on for 10, 20, 30 years. They just haven't done it yet. So for example, like the data side of things, cleaning up data so that you have clean data and it's actually accurate, and you've got all your master data in place. You've got your data governance so that you can actually start using AI and analytics tools. It's like the technology is getting so advanced and so sophisticated that it's further exposing these same deficiencies that organizations have had for decades now.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're an organization that has a scattered, sprawling, messy implementation, you can expect a scattered, sprawling, messy cloud migration. I guess that's probably the most blunt way to put it. So yeah, that's where you have the biggest leap ahead and the biggest set of tasks to try and mitigate that.
Wow, that's really good stuff. And what Brad just said deserves its own segment. Cloud migration doesn't create new problems. It exposes 20 years of old ones. It's very profound. And I think it's a really interesting point that I never really thought of in this context. And I'm glad Brad was here to help just even shape the way I think about it too, is you think about data, you think about workflows, customization, training, all this stuff that companies have struggled with for decades now. Cloud migrations now are exposing all of it all at once. I think we all kind of knew it was there, but we could bury it. We could patch things up with a spreadsheet here, a custom app over here, a workaround over there. We worked around it, right? We're human. We have ingenuity. We have creativity. We figure things out. That's our strength. But you do that over decades, and now you go to migrate to a common cloud platform, and that becomes really difficult. Every dirty data set gets exposed, every undocumented customization, every integration nobody understands anymore, every process that just works because Karen and accounting knows the right combination of clicks, every workaround that's been holding the business together with duct tape. Cloud migrations just bring it all to the surface. And now all of a sudden it's overwhelming because you've got to deal with it all relatively overnight. It took you 10 or 20 years of history to get all those problems to percolate or to brew under the surface. And now in a relatively short period of time, you're trying to move all that over to a totally different model in the cloud. And that's why these cloud projects oftentimes feel so painful. It's not the migration itself. It's the accumulated debt of decisions you made or didn't make 10 or 20 years ago. It's the clean data you never bothered to clean, the data governance you never bothered to set up, processes you never documented, the customizations you did but didn't justify or document, all the stuff rattling around in people's heads that's never been documented. But here's the silver lining. Cloud migration forces you to do the work you should have been doing all along. And so that is arguably the actual value of cloud migrations. I think that's actually the bigger value and the bigger opportunity that we should reframe here is rather than talking about pure technical debt or the merits of cloud architecture and the scalability and ease of use of cloud, all that stuff's great. It's important. But I think the real value is cleaning up all this stuff that's been a problem for organizations for a long time. You just look at data. I mean, I feel like data is the most obvious one to me because I remember when reporting was really an area of focus, maybe like 15 or 20 years ago. ERP vendors were getting really good at or starting to get really good at business intelligence, analytics, reporting, predictive analytics, all this stuff. And 10 or 20 years ago when that was happening, companies were saying, oh, shoot, our data sucks. We should probably clean that up. But what they did instead was they just let it sit and they didn't really take advantage of business intelligence and analytics and all this other stuff. And now with cloud and especially AI, now you have nowhere to hide. I mean, you can't use AI with bad data. And so I think data is a great example. It's been the entire time I've been in this industry. This industry has been talking about data, trying to convince customers to clean up their data. But now's the time. If you haven't done it, now's the time to do it. So if you do it right, you don't just end up in the cloud. You end up with a better business, which I think is what most of you want. You get cleaner data, documented processes, real governance, a team that actually knows how your operations work. And that's worth a lot more than the subscription savings that you might get. But it only works if you treat the migration as the opportunity it is, not as a burden that you want to avoid. So that's what I'd leave you with here, but I'd love to hear your feedback. As always, your thoughts on cloud migrations, what lessons learned you have, where you succeeded, where you failed, where you've run into challenges, what advice you'd give to anyone else. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So I want to thank you all for your great comments and questions and engagement here today. Thank you to Brad for being here today. Be sure to join us at Digital Stratosphere, our upcoming conference in September in Denver. Hopefully you saw the promo for that earlier. If you missed it, just go to stratosphere2026.com. And as always, be sure to check out my new book called Welcome to the Machine, which talks about how customers, vendors, and consultants all work in a very dysfunctional way together, unintentionally dysfunctional, that leads to digital transformation failure. And it gives you a playbook for how to overcome that and how to avoid some of those challenges. So be sure to check those two resources out. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. If you'd like to see past episodes, go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So hope you like this episode. Let me know what you think. We'll see you next week. Have a great week in the meantime. Take care.